Good afternoon, and welcome to today's Information Technology and Innovation Foundation webinar titled A Foundation for the Department of Energy, an idea whose time has come. This is a follow-on discussion to ITIF's briefing on its report, Mind the Gap, a design for a new energy technology commercialization foundation released last May. My name is Jetta Wong, and I was a co-author on that report, and I'm be your moderator for today's discussion. I am a senior fellow in the Energy Innovation Program at the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. ITIF is an independent, nonpartisan research and education institute focusing on the intersection of technological innovation and public policy. For the last 2 years, David Hart, the leader of the Energy Innovation Program at ITIF, and I have been working with many of you that are watching this briefing to develop the concept of a Department of Energy Foundation. In the report we released last May, we recommended that Congress authorize an agency-related foundation called the Energy Technology Commercialization Foundation that would enhance the activities of the Department of Energy and support organizations and entrepreneurs bringing clean energy technologies to the market through public-private partnerships. Today, you will hear from 2 of the agency-related foundations that we drew upon to develop the DOE Foundation, and you will get an update on where Congress is on establishing the DOE Foundation. If you're interested in asking questions, please refer to the Slido panel under the video on the event page or the Slido link in your YouTube description to ask questions. Now, let me quickly cover our run of show. And first, we will be joined by Senator Ben Ray Luján from New Mexico, but he's finishing up some Senate business, so I'm going to introduce our speakers, and then hopefully we can jump in and have him join us when he's able to. After hearing from Senator Luján, you'll first hear from, I should say, Kevin Klock, who's the Vice President of Operations and General Counsel for the Foundation for the National Institutes of Health. Kevin joined the foundation in 2015 and provides overall leadership for the foundation's corporate infrastructure and legal affairs. Kevin was formerly head of governance and assistant secretary for the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunization, or Gavi, and the company secretary for the Gavi campaign. Kevin will be followed by Monique Patrick, Chief Operations Officer for the CDC Foundation. Before joining the CDC Foundation in 2016, Monique served as the Chief Finance and Administrative Officer for Atlanta-based Points of Light Foundation, and before that, as Managing Director of Finance and Operations at the American Cancer Society. She brings more than 25 years of finance, operations, administration management to the foundation, where she oversees finance, human resources, legal, and information technology, and serves on the CDC Foundation's executive team. Hopefully then the senator will pop in and we'll hear a little bit from him. After that, we're going to switch gears and start talking about the Department of Energy Foundation, where you're going to hear first from Phil Singerman. Phil Singerman is the Senior Advisor for Technology Commercialization for the Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation, and was a senior advisor on the study team that prepared the congressionally directed and Innovation Foundation for DOE, Roles and Opportunities. In 2020, Mr. Singerman stepped down from federal service after 9 years as the first Associate Director for Innovation and Industry Services at the National Institutes of Standards and Technology. Previously, Mr. Singerman was also the U.S. Assistant Secretary for Commerce for Economic Development and directed the Economic Development Administration. And then finally, you will hear from Dana Lanza, CEO and President of Confluence Philanthropy. Confluence Philanthropy's mission is to transform the practice of investing by aligning capital with its community's values of sustainability, equity, and justice. It supports and catalyzes a membership network of private, public, and community foundations, family offices, individual donors, and their values-aligned investment advisors, representing more than $92 billion in philanthropic assets under management and over $3.5 trillion in managed capital. Dana launched Confluence Philanthropy in 2009 as a special project of Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors after serving as the executive director of the Environmental Grantmakers Association. So we're going to jump into the first part of our panel, and I'm going to invite Kevin from, as I mentioned earlier, the Foundation for the National Institutes for Health to speak. Kevin, I have to say, was one of the first people I spoke to about agency-related foundations. And he really helped me understand how foundations work with agencies and also how important their work is with stakeholders in developing public-private partnerships. So, Kevin, it's great to have you here. Please take the next 5 minutes to tell us a little bit about your foundation and what you've been doing over the last several months. Thank you.
Sure. I hope it comes across. I really like my job too. And so I'm excited to talk about the foundation and our public-private partnerships with the NIH. And let's be honest, it's been a time of great uncertainty, but it is also a time of hope. Just yesterday, a friend of mine at WHO posted that she finally received her COVID jab, and you could see her joy, but she cautioned there's much work still to be done, and there is. But let's take stock where we are. In America, efforts between the Department of Health and Human Services and DOE to engage across the US government and the private sector have shrunk timelines. I mean, in less than 2 years, a novel virus emerged, and the scientific community developed at least 3 highly safe and effective vaccines to protect us. Globally, the COVAX facility managed by Gavi and WHO has supplied close to 20 million doses to over 120 economies since February 24. Now, there's a ways to go there to be sure, but let's not overlook this meaningful step forward when in the not so distant past, new vaccine technology would take years to be introduced in the developing world. These are amazing examples of how government and the private sector can bring to bear their comparative advantages in partnership. Our foundation, the Foundation for the NIH, is the organization chartered by the US Congress to support the mission of the NIH. And we do that through public-private partnerships, resource mobilization, and coalition management, among others. We provide the NIH with a critical tool to add to its box to maximize impact, because in the end, this is about improving human health outcomes. Together, we created the Accelerating COVID-19 Therapeutic Interventions and Vaccines Program, or ACTIV, which, among other things, is designed to solve the challenge of parsing through the many compounds that were offered as potential therapies for COVID, and then getting the ones with the most potential into organized, scientifically rigorous, best-in-class clinical trials. There are now 6 master clinical trials testing therapeutics from neutralizing antibodies to immune modulators that suppress an overactive immune system or response to COVID, to anticoagulants to prevent heart attack and stroke. None of this happened in a vacuum. The foundation was well positioned to serve given its 25 years of successful partnerships. For example, ACTIV was originally designed off an existing accelerating medicines partnership model that has been used to expand our knowledge on cancer, autoimmune disease, Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's, and others. And we support patients. At NIH, patients perform a hugely patriotic civic service by offering themselves as research subjects at the NIH Clinical Center. We know that the most important people in their lives as they cope with disease are their caregivers. For years, there was nowhere for those caregivers from out of town to stay, particularly if they were not people of means. So one of our early projects was to construct, and we now help maintain, the Edmund J. Safra Family Lodge as their home away from home. It's right next door to the clinical center and their loved ones. We also mobilize private resources in support of the NIH mission, from facilitating the delivery of hospital beds for COVID-19 patients in developing countries to raising over $1.2 billion. And by the way, that is roughly, give or take, 80 times the investment the US government has made in our operations. So this is a pretty good deal for taxpayers. Now, to be sure, This reflects the FNIH experience, and other agencies and their foundations will have different needs, different challenges, and they must identify their own unique value proposition. But public-private partnerships are truly a modern means for pursuing policy outcomes. When partners bring to bear their comparative advantages, there is the right mix of inputs, execution, and ownership over outcomes, and it is done in an atmosphere of trust and collaboration. There will continue to be vexing scientific questions to answer. So developing credibility over time, demonstrating that the agency foundation relationship can and does catalyze innovation and discovery to support the agency's mission. Those are critical for delivering outcomes for the American people. So it's good to be with you, Jetta, and colleagues, and those of you watching, and I really look forward to this conversation.
Thank you so much, Kevin. That is really helpful, wonderful work, and I really appreciate all of that information. Right now, we're going to turn to Monique from the CDC Foundation. As you just heard from Kevin, each foundation is unique and meets the mission needs of its agency, has different kinds of partnerships. And I have to say, as this year has gone by and I've been researching a DOE foundation, I would look back to the CDC Foundation and see its 22 updates on what it's been doing over this last year. And there was a little kind of silver lining of everything that was going on, just to see the amazing work that you're doing. So Monique, could you please tell us about the CDC Foundation's activities, its relationship with the CDC, and what you've been up to? Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Jetta. And it's good to be here today and to join you in the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. As you said, I am the Chief Operating Officer for nearly 5 years at the Foundation, and I hope this session today that I'm here to help you will help you consider a foundation for the Department of Energy. As many of you may know, the Foundation, the CDC Foundation, was created by Congress in the 1990s to extend CDC's life-saving work through establishment of public and private partnerships and with the philanthropic and private sectors. So it was started and it was an independent, and it still is an independent nonprofit. We have our own board of directors, which does not have any representation from CDC. Now it was established based on some of the CDC previous directors, like Dr. Bill Foege, who was very instrumental in the central role with the smallpox eradication. The former CDC directors knew that government expertise and support is very critical to meet the public health needs of our society, but they also knew that government cannot do everything on its own. And so it looks for business, it looks for philanthropies, and also individuals to do a lot of work together. So working together, we can meet some of the health challenges. So since 1995, the foundation has raised over $1.25 billion to support the work of CDC through about 1,200 programs. Over this time frame, we've worked with partners and different philanthropy organizations, from cardiovascular disease to cancer, malaria, HIV, sickle cell, and a lot of emergency response, from Ebola, hurricanes, and now COVID-19. While I could probably talk all day about all our different programs, today the focus is really on the COVID-19 pandemic and how we helped extend and enhance CDC's response. As you know, COVID-19 is the biggest threat to health in over 100 years. And in January, based on what CDC and the foundation was seeing, we decided to launch our emergency response. The emergency response unit is one of the units that sit under my organization, which is the COO, but it touches matrix management all across the entire organization. From CDC's foundation, we have seen so much how we need everybody along to the private sector and the public sector to work together. While government support is usually appropriated for an emergency like COVID-19, it takes a while for those funds to be deployed. So hence, this is when we come on board and we help with the flexible philanthropic and private support that we engage in. It's imperative, it's needed. As part of the COVID-19 response, the foundation was able to draw upon our network of donors and supporters, as well as bring hundreds and thousands of new supporters and individuals to help fight this response. So through the support, we've done a lot of critical different needs. For instance, we provided immediate as well as a long-term support to help build capacity in the community-based organizations for their on-ground work in the communities across the country. We are working disproportionately impacted communities. We're working in those to help include and deliver services for communities of color to address the health equity challenges that were here even before COVID-19, but have been elevated since COVID-19. To meet the needs of our nation's public health departments, we have been able to hire and manage over 1,000 surge staff to meet the needs of the public-private partnership, the public health departments through public-private partnerships, donors, and support. Critically, we also purchased more than 8 million pieces of personal protective equipment for the frontline health workers. And we have launched numerous, which you probably have seen, national communication campaigns to address all the issues ranging for COVID-19 and the protective measures that mental health has on it. And so we do so much more, and every day we're still growing and still meeting the needs of what the CDC needs are. And I'm deeply appreciative of all the philanthropic work that we do with our private sectors and independently of what the government also needs. So as you can see, we work together and it becomes a teaming approach with our with CDC, with our public and private partnerships, and with individual giving. So today I just want to thank you for having me here today, and hopefully if there are any additional questions, I will be here to answer them. Thank you, Jetta.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Monique. It was great to hear about everything that you've been doing. And yes, please do stick with us. We're going to have some questions at the end. But now I believe we have Senator Luján on, and I think that there he is. Terrific. Excellent. Wonderful to see you, Senator. Thank you so much for being with us today. Can you hear me okay?
I certainly can. Thanks for having me today.
Wonderful. Awesome. I'm going to do a quick introduction and then the floor is going to be yours.
Thank you.
Wonderful. So Senator Luján was sworn into office as a U.S. Senator this January. He previously served as U.S. Representative from New Mexico's 3rd Congressional District and House Assistant Speaker in the 116th Congress. Since he was elected to Congress in 2008, he has championed efforts to create good-paying jobs in New Mexico and build a clean energy economy and uplift the middle class. Senator Luján has focused on spurring local economic growth through a number of legislative initiatives, including as the co-sponsor of the Partnerships for Energy Security and Innovation Act, a bipartisan piece of legislation to establish the nonprofit foundation for the Department of Energy. And so, Senator, I know you're going to talk more about that, so I'm just going to kick it to you.
Well, I want to thank you, Jetta, first for that kind introduction, and to everyone over at ITIF for inviting me to be with you today. Thank you for what you do in fostering collaboration between experts and policymakers. America needs bold policy initiatives that empower innovators to solve the world's greatest challenges through technology, and ITIF is a champion in this regard. As many of you know, on Earth Day, Senator Coons, Graham, and I reintroduced a bipartisan bill, the Partnership for Energy Security and Innovation Act. This bill establishes a nonprofit foundation, the Foundation for Energy Security and Innovation, to facilitate stronger partnerships between the Department of Energy and the private sector to support DOE's mission. Now, many of you may know that we were successful in passing this out of the House in the previous Congress, but we just couldn't get it across the finish line. But we intend to make that a reality in this Congress. To meet our nation's climate and energy goals, we must act boldly and urgently. This means overcoming the significant challenges and barriers in moving new technology from discovery to commercialization and deployment. As a government agency, the DOE is limited in how it can push the commercialization process. However, a foundation can work more closely with the private sector to meet commercialization needs. Nonprofit foundations are a proven tool to support agency missions. Several federal agencies, including CDC, NIH, FWS, USFS, and NPS, already successfully work with nonprofit foundations. These partnerships have aided our efforts to address the current pandemic, helped us discover new pathways to cancer drugs, supported our efforts to fight rare diseases, and much more. There's also interest in replicating this model elsewhere in the federal government. In 2014, Congress authorized the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research for the USDA. And last year, the National Institutes of Standards and Technology recognized the value of foundation serves for commercialization efforts and advocated for authorizations to establishing foundations across the government in their green paper on tech transfer. Also, oftentimes promising technologies die because the major players in the continuum from research to market and services are not well connected. FESI can help fill this critical gap. Foundations have proven to do that time and time again. It would facilitate energy innovators access to DOE technical expertise and world-class facilities. A foundation will accelerate the transition of new energy technologies into the market while supporting American companies, bolstering private sector investments, and creating the jobs of the future. I expect our discussions today will delve further into the functions of such a foundation and the challenges one might address. And I look forward to the rest of this event. I say congratulations again on bringing everyone together. And I look forward to President Biden signing this legislation into law, whether it's standalone or part of a larger package. So thanks again for having me.
Thank you so much. I love that. I love that last thing about making sure that and seeing that President Biden signs this into law. That is wonderful. Well, thank you. I know that you have a very busy day. So if you need to pop off, we completely understand. Thank you again for your support, for your work on the foundation bill, and so many other science and technology initiatives going on in the Congress. You are a true champion. So at this point, we are going to be turning to a full discussion on the DOE Foundation. As you just heard from the Senator, we had some great progress over the last year since our May 13th briefing on the release of our report. So I'm going to just kind of recap for everyone what has gone on. So since the publishing of our report, we have had a number of people engaged in this conversation, including the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, which recommended establishing the foundation in its action plan for a clean energy economy. We also had the National Academies. They held a series of public workshops on energy innovation, and the foundation was discussed as a new useful mechanism for partnerships. The House Science Committee held a hearing on the original bill. And as you heard from the Senator, the House passed the foundation bill in the Clean Economy, Jobs, and Innovation Act last year. And now we're hoping the Senate and the House again will pass the bill. Additionally, we saw the publishing of the National Academy of Public Administration's report, which was congressionally mandated by Congress. And that's what we're going to turn to next. So we will have Phil Singerman, who was a senior advisor on that report, give us a quick summary of the report's findings. And Phil, if you are there, you have about 7 minutes.
Very
the floor
good.
Is yours.
Thank you, Jetta, and I will indeed give you a very quick summary. In the fiscal year 2020 conference report on the Energy and Water Appropriations Act, Congress directed DOE to contract with the National Academy of Public Administration, NAPA, to perform an independent assessment of the value of a nonprofit foundation to promote technology transfer through DOE programs and national labs to the marketplace and for the broader public benefit. There were three primary components of the study: an independent assessment of the potential value of such a nonprofit foundation to promote technology transfer. Second, an examination of current federal agency-related nonprofit research foundations, focusing on structure, governance, missions, and roles. And third, an analysis of how a DOE foundation might complement the existing tech transfer activities of the 3 current lab-associated foundations. The resulting 200-page report, An Innovation Foundation for DOE Roles and Responsibilities, was released in January 2021. It's available on napawash.org. Was also provided to the audience as part of the backup for this webinar. The report was overseen by a panel of NAPA fellows, experts in DOE, tech transfer nonprofit organization, and was prepared by NAPA staff on which I served. I want to point out that a starting point for our work was the Impact for Energy bill that Senator Luján mentioned, introduced by Senator Coons and Graham in 2019, and the ITIF study, Mind the Gap, that Jetta Wong and David Hart prepared, released in 2020. I'm now going to summarize the 7 major findings and recommendations of the NAPA report. The top headline is that we recommend that NAPA recommended the creation of a DOE foundation that would be complementary and supplementary to DOE, national laboratories, extramural programs, and the lab-associated foundations. Further, the panel recommended the adoption of a networked approach that would involve a national level foundation working closely with current and future lab-associated foundations. 2, the report found that successful agency-related foundations share similar characteristics. They have sufficient funding to stand up the foundation and continued funding to support administrative activities. And they have enabling legislation and governance that clearly articulates the broad mission, scope of activities, structure, including design of the board directors, appropriate governance and oversight mechanisms, including comprehensive conflict of interest procedures. 3, there is significant interest among private sector and philanthropic funders to selectively collaborate with DOE Foundation. In our interviews with stakeholders, we found that philanthropic entities look for opportunities to make early investments in their areas of programmatic interest, and they see the DOE Foundation as a connector of these activities. 4, the panel recognizes the value of a broad concept of technology transfer as a multi-level approach inclusive of the varied ways that knowledge, facilities, and technologies are diffused, disseminated, demonstrated, deployed, and commercialized for public benefit through direct, indirect, and network pathway mechanisms. I want to put a pin here. This is a very important finding and recommendation of the panel. The traditional metrics of tech transfer, the narrow traditional metrics of technology transfer are not adequate to compete in the global economy. And so we have adopted a more contemporary definition of technology transfer in the study that we have presented. 5, a widely accepted role of a DOE foundation is one that would encompass all of DOE's non-classified mission space, thereby recognizing the potential contributions across all of DOE's constituent programs and organizational elements, which could make could achieve the proposed legislative purposes of a foundation. This is also a significant finding, as demonstrated by DOE's response to the COVID response, which was managed internally by the agency. All of the constituent elements of the organization, the various science labs, national security labs, applied energy labs, multipurpose labs, and single-purpose labs were able to make a contribution to responding to COVID as they would to any major national challenge, such as the challenge of clean energy. 6, a successful DOE foundation depends upon a robust DOE-led technology transfer program, which requires continued congressional action and agency initiatives through continued internal process improvements, through broader legal authorities, dedicated funding, delegated and decentralized implementation, through tangible incentives for the national laboratories, through performance management metrics, and through visible agency leadership at the highest level. This is another important finding of the report. Congress, DOE stands out among all federal agencies in terms of its performance in traditional tech transfer metrics, invention disclosures, patents, licenses, royalty income, cooperative research and development agreements. It is governed by congressional legislation stretching back 40 years by Dole and Stevenson-Weidler. And it is led by the work of the agency through its 17 national laboratories. This is the tall pole for technology transfer, and continued activity in this space is a requirement for continued progress in technology transfer. 6, in recognition of the contemporary definition of technology transfer, a DOE foundation should identify and amplify those existing programs and activities, including extramural programs such as ARPA-E and SBIR and innovation institutes, where the foundation's mission and capabilities could add value to increase effective technology transfer. And finally, 7, lab-associated foundations can help connect the unique capabilities and resources of each lab to other regional and national stakeholders. And this includes not just the 16 GOCO federally funded research and development centers, but also the National Energy Technology Laboratory, NETL, which is a GOGO and is subject to the more restrictive federal requirements under the Stevenson-Weidler Act. Let me conclude with a footnote to what Senator Luján said and Jetta's introduction. Last month on Earth Day, Senators Coons, Luján, and Graham introduced the Partnerships for Energy Security and Innovation Act, which was a modification of the 2019 Impact for Energy Act, and which indeed adopts a broad definition of the purpose of the foundation to ensure, quote, the security and prosperity of the United States by addressing energy, environmental, and nuclear challenges through transformative science and technology solutions, and specifically proposed that the National Foundation support and collaborate with individual lab-associated foundations. Subsequent to our study, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory has just recently created a 4th lab-associated foundation, and several of the other labs are considering doing the same. Finally, in the legislation, there is specific authority for the National Energy Technology Laboratory, the GOGO, NETL, to establish or enter into an agreement with a nonprofit organization to create a local federal lab-associated foundation, so that NETL will have the same flexibility to work with the private sector as the GOGOs do. Jetta, that concludes my comments. I'm delighted to answer any questions in our subsequent conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Phil. Thank you for your work on the report and this great update. As you can tell, the congressional sponsors of this important bill have been listening to all of the stakeholders, to the NAPA authors on how they can improve this bill. And we hope that this conversation can continue to help evolve the activities and the senators' thinking on this new bill. And with that, I would like to turn to Dana Lanza. Dana, we first met when I was still at the Department of Energy running the Office of Technology Transitions in the Obama administration. And that was about 6 years ago. So we would love to hear from you on why you, as one of those stakeholders out there, and as Phil said in his third finding, it's really important to have the outside stakeholders, including the philanthropic groups, engaged in this conversation for it to be successful. So why does Confluence Philanthropy think that this is important, and how would this change things compared to 6 years ago? Thank you, Dana.
Thanks so much, Jetta. I'm so excited to be here and to just support this effort. As Jetta mentions, we met 6 years ago. I can't believe it's been that long. A lot's happened in 6 years, and a lot hasn't happened as it regards climate change. And we are running out of time to address climate change. If any of you out there are following the science, you know that we have really less than a decade to curtail the worst projected impacts of climate change. But this meeting and this initiative and all the good work the Department of Energy is focusing on today is really, it's not about what might happen if we don't, but it's more about what can happen if we do. And if this vision for this foundation gets off the ground, we can continue to position the United States and our brilliant entrepreneurs developing technology solutions as leaders around the world in solving this crisis, and also bringing all kinds of other side benefits to clean technology to the world. And that's really why Confluence Philanthropy has decided to spend our time on this and is here today, is to advocate for that. When I met Jetta under the Obama administration, and we were asked to support the administration and the Department of Energy going into the climate talks in Paris, you know, we're a relatively small nonprofit. We have a lot to do, but we decided to volunteer, to spend our time and energy in trying to understand what this vision was all about. And then we decided to really lean in and bring investors to the Paris talks and to spend a lot of time uplifting this vision and this work. And the reason for that is because it is just so inspiring to meet these entrepreneurs in the national labs developing these technologies who we got to meet through this vision, and to think about the amazing world-changing things they want to do and can do with the support of the federal government. But they can't do it without other kinds of support. And that other kinds of support is support from private investors. And this is really where the rub is. How do private investors connect with the federal government? How do they find their way through the morass of all these different initiatives that we've talked about today? How do they do the due diligence on these technologies? Everything we've heard is it's a lot of government speak. And so you can imagine if you're someone running a small family foundation or an investor who has resources and feels inspired by this national call to action, and you want to practice public-private partnerships, where do you go from there? The foundation is a way to solve that problem. It can be a one-stop shop for investors to have some handholding, frankly, the handholding they're going to need to figure out how to partner with the federal government and also with other state agencies to advance this vision of supporting American entrepreneurship and building technology solutions. It's also a place where they can meet other investors. Maybe they're going to meet other philanthropies. Maybe they're going to meet other institutional investors like pension funds or other kinds of private investors, and be able to begin layering the capital needed to get this innovation out of the national labs, off of people's desks and desktops, and out into the world to commercialize these technologies so that they can benefit everybody. And, you know, philanthropy at its heart is in the business of solving problems, right? And so right now, when philanthropy thinks about climate change, it feels daunting. It feels like a crisis. It doesn't feel like an opportunity. And the foundation's vision is one about turning it into an opportunity. It's an opportunity to not just solve a problem, but to actually inspire solutions, all kinds of solutions. And I think that is what is the most exciting thing about this work. It's about what could happen that we haven't even imagined yet when we create the resources for that kind of imagination. And you know, I just, on a personal level, that is so exciting to me. That's why I work in philanthropy, and that's why I'm excited about what the Department of Energy is doing. That's why I'm excited about some of the leadership, Senator Luján and Senator Coons and others that are excited about this kind of work. And I'm excited about the administration in Washington right now, because I want to be proud about the way the American government is showing up to solve the climate crisis. And I want to feel like the little tiny things that I can do every day at my desk and that millions of other Americans can do are part of leaning into this opportunity that we have right now. patient long-term investors like those that we represent at Confluence Philanthropy, they need stability. They're small organizations that can't readjust themselves every time there's an election. If the Congress and the Department of Energy wants the help of this investor community, you need to foster stability. And I think a public-private partnership just outside the government that can make sense of the government and be a liaison to these investors, I think that's what's needed to bring people in so that they have a go-to place and they can build long-term relationships and the kinds of relationships that we know we need to solve the climate crisis. So I'm here to answer questions. I'm here to be an advocate and a cheerleader and a supporter, but I'm also here for the long term. So if this passes, I will use all the resources that I have at my personal disposal and that I can represent on behalf of our organization to support this to get off the ground and to help build the connectivity needed to make it a success. So, so thanks so much for having us, and I'd love to answer questions now, or feel free for anyone to reach out and contact us. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dana. Thank you for your excitement and all that you've been doing. It's really wonderful to have you here. Now I'm going to ask to bring up all of our panelists, and we're going to do a couple of Q&A. Actually, we have some good time. That's great. And I think I want to start. Let me first remind people that if you'd like to ask a question, please refer to the Slido panel that's underneath this video on the event page, or on the Slido link in the YouTube description in case you want to ask some questions. And we already have some, so I'm going to take my moderator's prerogative here and start this off. I would like to kind of start with this idea that everyone has touched on, which is really around public-private partnerships. And this first goes to Kevin and Monique, really trying to understand what is the foundation's role in developing these kinds of public-private partnerships with your agencies? Because for the Department of Energy, it can do public-private partnerships, but I want to understand, like, what is it that you do to enhance that kind of relationship? Kevin, do you want to start off?
Sure. Well, it's important. Let's start with what is a public-private partnership, right? So, and there are lots of definitions out there. One definition I like is to say government and the private sector first bring to bear their comparative advantages, right? So there's a reason that not only government's involved, but certain aspects of the private sector are involved. Oftentimes, if a question comes to us and it's better for the agency to do it itself, and it should. So it's identifying those deltas, those inflection points where it makes sense for private sector to be involved and for us to be a mechanism for that involvement. So bring to bear their comparative advantages. And then you have that right mix of inputs. It's not simply an outsourcing activity, but the inputs, there's the right mix. There isn't a default mix, but it's the right one, and it's very situation specific. That execution is shared, and that responsibility over the outcome, that the outcomes belong to the partnership and not to one set of parties is important. And that it's done in an atmosphere of trust and collaboration. That doesn't mean there aren't protections or ground rules or any of those things involved, but these are partnerships. These are not adversarial. And so developing a history, getting that mix right, that'll take some time. But those are the essential elements in figuring out how to get these partnerships off the ground. Monique, is that your experience too? How's it with you in Atlanta?
Yeah, it's quite similar, Kevin, but there's also we work a lot with the leaders at CDC and the scientists when we're trying to look at our priorities, as well as the strategic direction of both teams. We have the private organizations that we work with, and CDC will say we want to understand, or we want to do studies or funding, or we need support in different countries. So I say, Nigeria, can you bring partnerships together? And so sometimes, our programmatic team work a lot with the scientists and leaders at CDC. They integrate and communicate together. and becomes an overall partnership. So a lot of back and forth in terms of understanding the needs of the CDC, as well as understanding the needs of our partner. And then we formulate relationships, evaluations, everything usually are hand in hand as we do agreements and documentation as well.
Jetta, that what Monique just said there is so important, right? Because everything starts with an idea in someone's brain. It could be in government, it could be in private sector. And you start with that idea. And oftentimes we think about, you know, these projects, we have this very clear idea and we try to get people, you know, into our side. This is how it's done. These partnerships can start like that, but they are enhanced by bringing those perspectives in the room, and necessarily the scope of the partnership will evolve to take in all those different perspectives. It's so important to be open to doing it. It's not a relationship where one party says to the rest, this is how it's going to be. It's very consensus driven, bringing everybody to the table. And so that's why there's so much sharing involved in how they're built and they're executed.
Let me throw this to Dana then, as one of those partners that could work with a DOE foundation. What is it that you think your members need and would like to see in a collaborative effort with the DOE Foundation and the DOE scientists and the larger ecosystem that DOE maintains as one of the largest funders of science in the country and the largest funder of energy in the country? It has a huge network. What would your members need from this kind of foundation?
Well, again, I think one of the most exciting things about this effort is the opportunity to collaborate and learn about what's happening in the labs. So there was an event that was held this spring, I think it was, before we had the Paris conference around the UNFCCC conference. And we got to meet some of the entrepreneurs there. And just to hear what they're working on is so inspiring. And it would create an opportunity for foundations and family offices to learn about these solutions from the people creating them, and then to have resources to do the due diligence on them so that they could potentially invest in them. So right now, when foundations sit down and they talk about solving the climate crisis, frankly, they don't talk a lot about clean tech and clean tech solutions, because that feels out of reach for a lot of philanthropies that don't have that technical expertise on their staff to do due diligence on these entrepreneurs and on these technologies. It's very, very technical stuff. What the foundation can do is provide those resources to have experts help people understand these technologies, introduce them to the entrepreneurs. Maybe there's a certain kind of technology that they're more interested in than another. Guide them to the right sorts of things that they might be interested in investing in. And then again, what are the public partnership opportunities so that a foundation doesn't have to understand the Beltway to know that, but they can just go to the foundation and they can hear about ways to layer capital and partner with public pools of funding to also co-invest alongside them. So these are a couple of things, but to be totally honest with you, I think, you know, in the outset, the most exciting thing is that inspiration and helping philanthropy get excited about innovation and advancing this entrepreneurship. It would just be amazing. And then they might even come up with their own programs that they haven't thought of yet to support these entrepreneurs. And I think that's what's also really exciting.
And I think that that's something that we've heard from a lot of other stakeholders, is really trying to lift up this vision that there's an opportunity in this space, and then provide some catalytic resources that can help bring people together around programs that DOE is already funding or new initiatives that they evolve and collaborate on together. And so I'd actually like to turn to Phil. One of the questions that we got in from our Slido is that it's to see if you could talk a little bit about how this foundation will fit in within the existing DOE ecosystem for innovation and tech transfer. And there are a number of great things already going on at the labs. And so how do you see a DOE foundation fitting into this broader ecosystem?
So I think as I tried to convey in my remarks, I think the data shows that DOE is doing, compared to other federal agencies, an excellent job in technology transfer, both narrowly defined and broadly defined. but it is inevitably constrained by federal legislation and regulations. So a foundation can, I think, work in niches and gaps. Kevin didn't quite use the word, he used a similar word to gaps. Gaps in the innovation ecosystem. For example, working with small enterprises. Big corporations, big foundations don't have much difficulty. They find ways to work with DOE and other federal agencies, but across the board, small companies, underserviced communities, and underrepresented populations, they have challenges piercing the federal veil of resources and capabilities. So a foundation could serve as a useful function in that role. In the American Energy Innovation Act that was passed in 2020, there's a concept of frontline communities, communities that have been adversely affected by environmental decisions and energy decisions over the decades. This is a new area for DOE. A foundation could operate in that space, and other new areas such as equity, diversity, and inclusivity, where federal agencies are understandably hampered in their ability to respond flexibly. Finally, a foundation can do something, and the three other panelists have remarked upon this, can do something that the federal agencies cannot do, which is it could actively seek philanthropic and private sector funding. Federal agencies, understandably, are bound and limited in their ability to do that. And so what a foundation can do is, as the foundations that are represented on this panel, can actively seek out those types of resources which otherwise are not available to achieve important national challenges.
I'd like to just go back to one of the things that you were mentioning around the flexibility that these foundations have that the federal government doesn't necessarily have. And Monique, I saw that you were nodding when Phil was saying that. So I thought maybe, I know you mentioned this in your remarks, but if you could talk a little bit more about, some of the things that you were able to do and to react to quickly that CDC just would not have been able to. And why would CDC not be able to do some of the things that you were working so hard on?
Yeah, one of the biggest things that we did over the past year, and I was intimately involved in it, was surge hire. CDC, the government, isn't able to hire fast. So one of the things we can do is get contact tracers out there within a 2 to 3 months to the different jurisdictions and locations across the United States and USVI to support the needs of the communities. We also have been able to get them faster, quicker, and meet the needs epidemiologists, to scientists, so very quick and get into the hands of what people needed to make decisions and move the business forward. We are also seeing it, as Phil has stated, meeting those different communities that the government can't reach, that the government can't get community-based organization grants to. And so those are some of the things we're seeing, that working with private donors, philanthropy, that we can get the support out and still meet the needs of what CDC and the public health system needs.
So let me ask you, how did you fund these activities? Because it's one of the things that everyone asks is, how are these agency-related foundations funded?
Yeah, there are different ways. Some of them we do receive federal grants from that we have applied and received. There's also private donors that have given us funding to support the needs. And there's also the individual giving that we saw an enormous growth through our marketing and our social media. And so those funds and certain private donors that we want to reach these communities can use surge staff and help us get us there. And that's what we did. So it is being flexible, it's being nimble, it's being able to get into the communities what they need quickly.
And Kevin, I know that with some of your bigger public-private partnerships and long-term relationships that the foundation has been able to develop, that you look at funding in bringing different things together. Can you talk maybe about how you fund some of your larger public-private partnerships?
Yeah. First thing I wanted to say is, just so all the participants are clear, foundation should never, ever be a vehicle for getting around federal law or federal rules. Never, ever, ever. So it's really important. That's why the statute from the Congress is so important, because it really is your North Star for what is in bounds and what can be done. I mentioned a metric earlier that we'd raised a bit over 1.2 billion over really our lifetime, 25 years. And you could say, well, wait a second, your agency gets a little north of 40 billion each year. Is that 1.2 billion dollars really, really meaningful? And yes, it's meaningful in a few ways. One, as anyone who's applied for an NIH grant knows, that the standard to get funded is so high. I think one year at the National Cancer Institute, the pay line was at 8, meaning, very, very few grants could be funded. But our money is flexible because it doesn't originate from the U.S. Treasury, which is part of those flexibilities that are involved. So, for example, we can hold the grant with a contract research organization, with a university to do a piece of work that doesn't necessarily have to go through a government process, because it's not taxpayer money that goes out to that purpose. So, the couple examples about how that can be done.
That's great. Thank you so much. So I have about 3 minutes left. And so, Phil, I have one last question that I'm going to ask. And I think that this is critical, and you touched on it just briefly about how important, even with the great work that's already going on at the Department of Energy related to technology transfer and the broad definition of technology transfer, it's still important to have a DOE foundation. The question is why? And if you can do it in 2 minutes, kudos to you.
Well, I think the panelists from CDC and NIH have really demonstrated, the value of a foundation to fulfilling the mission of those two very important and very large organizations. NIH is as large as DOE, and NIH are of a comparable size. And yet the NIH Foundation has made a significant contribution, not just in response to COVID as the CDC Foundation has, but over the decades. I think that what one wants in the legislation, if I can pivot to that, is the flexibility, the startup funding, the governance structure, the red lines, the conflict of interest, and the staffing to allow the organization to respond to the unanticipated challenges that we know will occur, but we cannot predict what and when. COVID-19 is a perfect example of that. NIH and CDC were positioned to respond positively and effectively to support the agency and the national mission in those spaces. So I think we want to allow the DOE Foundation to be able to respond to a broad array of opportunities that will in part be guided by the interest of the donor community, the philanthropic and private sector community, who will be a partner with the foundation in determining what are the areas of activity that require this type of public-private partnership. So DOE is, I'm a big fan of DOE's performance, but there's great potential and promise, and I think a foundation can contribute to that if it's properly organized and structured and funded.
Thank you so much. So with that, I'm going to say thank you to all of our panelists, to the audience for coming and listening to this session, to ITIF and Sydney and David and everyone else there for helping to put this on. And just to let everyone know that the recording of this conversation will be available on YouTube and on the ITIF website. This is a wonderful opportunity for our country, for our scientists to really meet some of our great challenges using science and technology. You've seen some really wonderful examples today. Please reach out if you'd like any more information. And again, thank you, everyone. Have a great day and goodbye.